Hey, kia ora, Helen Brahms here again. So I thought about it and I suddenly decided, yes, I was definitely going to do this. So tonight we've already done our Facebook Live for today, but this is an extra one that you're getting because I still need to catch you guys up on my James Bond movie fest for the month of November. So when I last did one, it was for Your Eyes Only that came out in 1981. And now we're on to, and so since then I have seen Octopussy, A View to a Kill, Living Daylights, and License to Kill. So tonight you are getting Octopussy and A View to a Kill, the review of those. Those are the last two Roger Moore movies that were done. He's currently the longest. He's currently the only actor that has done as many movies as he had. He did 7. So and it was kind of interesting because I was looking back at some figures the other day, and Sean Connery did a total of 6. And we're talking about those in the franchise, not those outside the franchise. So Sean Connery did 6 within the franchise. George Lazenby did 1. Roger Moore did 7. Timothy Dalton did 2. Pierce Brosnan did 4. And Daniel Craig to date has done 4 as well and is working on No Time to Die that's coming out next year. Sean Connery, if you add in there Never Say Never Again, which he did in 1983 as a remake of Thunderball, but it was done outside the franchise, then that would give him number 7 as well. So, thought they like that little tidbit. And remember I was in one of the reviews when they were looking for a replacement for Sean Connery. It's when they brought Roger Moore in, and one of the guys they looked at was Burt. Remember I spoke about this about Burt Reynolds when they were looking at somebody to replace Roger Moore. So for Live and Let Die, they were thinking about Burt Reynolds, and Cubby Broccoli turned around and said, nope, he's got to be over 6 foot and I want British. And I thought, how tall are the James Bonds? Do you know how tall they are? So Sean Connery was the tallest to date at 6'2". George Lazenby was 6'1.5". And so was Timothy Dalton. They were both the same height. Roger Moore and Pierce Brosnan were both 6'1". And Daniel Craig is the shortest at 5'10". So there's another little tidbit for you. Kind of cool. It's amazing what you find out when you go researching these sorts of things. I actually have a Bond trivia game, and so I have these different encyclopedias that have come out over the year about James Bond and all that, but they're all in storage right now. So I'm having to go and relearn all this information again since I haven't watched any James Bond for a while. So now to Octopussy, which came out in 1983. The pre-credit sequence, and I love these pre-credit sequences because some of them are really, really cool. It sort of like gives you this pow start to the movie, and then you have the big finale, so you start with a bang and you end with a bang. So they're always cool. But the pre-credit sequence that they used in Octopussy, they didn't have to film for Octopussy because they had previously filmed it for Moonraker. And it's with the BB jet. It's this little short jet with these little short wings, and they do these little flying stunts and all that sort of stuff going through this hangar thing and coming out the other side, and the missiles they've got following this thing when they're trying to blow it out of the air ends up getting caught inside this hangar, and the whole thing goes kaboom. But they actually filmed that they actually filmed it for Moonraker, and when they were doing the editing and stuff for Moonraker, they decided to drop it out. And then when it came to Octopussy, they thought, let's use it there. So they did. Now Maud Adams they brought back. She was Andrea Anders from The Man with the Golden Gun. She was Scaramanga's love interest in that, and got, of course, killed off in that movie. Excuse me. But they brought her back as Octopussy. So she came back as the leading lady in Octopussy, and they actually were. Hang on. I'm just going to throw over my notes here because I'm getting myself confused. They were actually looking for another James Bond for Octopussy because I believe it was in For Your Eyes Only, Roger Moore's contract came up for renewal at the end of that movie. So they were actually debuting new actors. They looked at Michael Billington. They brought in James Brolin to do a screen test with Maud Adams. They called her and said, hey, can you come do the screen test for these new James Bond guys? And they actually showed you this James Brolin doing his screen test with Maud Adams. And at the end of it, they turned around to her and said, how would you like to be Octopussy? And she was like, okay. So that's how she ended up being Octopussy. So at the end, they also introduced a new M. Now, in the making of For Your Eyes Only, they did not mention anything about Bernard Lee, who had passed away during the filming of that from stomach cancer. They didn't mention anything about that, and he had been M since Dr. No. He had brought it all the way through, and he actually started filming scenes for Your Eyes Only when he got sick. So they decided, and eventually passed away at the beginning of '81. So they decided not to replace him as M out of respect for him. So I thought it was kind of interesting that they didn't mention anything about that in the making of it. So in Octopussy, they bring in a new M. And but again, no mention about why they're bringing in a new M. Nothing about it. So like, this guy was, yeah, whatever. But they said by the release of For Your Eyes Only, James Bond had become the highest grossing movie series of all time. Now you think, that came out in '81. You had Star Wars coming out in the '70s. You had the Planet of the Apes coming out at that time as well. A lot of movies starting to come. I can't remember when the first Star Trek came out. And yet James Bond, which had been going since 1962, came out as the highest grossing movie series of all times after For Your Eyes Only. And of course, it's still going today. They went into pre-production for Octopussy in 1982. And it began on the... hang on. Oh, and as they began, and of course, this was the 13th James Bond movie, and as they began in production, that's when Sean Connery announced that he would be starring in a rival James Bond movie, which was Never Say Never Again. In fall of '91, they began on the script of Octopussy and designed it to take place in India, which is where it took place. They were talking about some of the incredible things, that a lot of things like Peter Lamont, who does the production design and all that, his plane was hijacked. He nearly got killed. His plane was hijacked when they were busy scouting a location. The plane had taken off. This guy takes over the plane. They hijack the plane. He's threatening to kill everybody on board. And thankfully, everything came to a good conclusion, and he was fine. So then, because Roger Moore's contract had expired at the end of Your Eyes Only, they started debuting new actors with Michael Billington, James Brolin, and then and at the last moment, Roger Moore signed for another movie, so he signed on to do Octopussy. Octopussy was actually a short story that Ian Fleming wrote for James Bond, and one of the controversies that were around this movie was the title of Octopussy. It didn't, people, because James Bond girls have always had these very interesting names, and now all of a sudden one of these names was the title of a movie, and it was causing some controversy. And then they went back and said, well, here's Ian Fleming's book. That's the short story. That's the one we're writing about. That's what it's called. Boom, done. They were filming around Checkpoint Charlie in the movie Octopussy. Hang on. Oh yeah, because they were filming around the Berlin Wars. Sorry, the circus scene getting them. Yeah. A few days since I've seen Octopussy. Usually I do this immediately, like the next day, because then it's fresh in my head. So excuse me for having to go back a little bit. They were doing around the Berlin Wall, because the Berlin Wall was still up at that point. It hadn't come down at that. So they're doing all this filming. They're saying you can see the guards up there at Checkpoint Charlie. They're down there watching them doing all this filming and everything else. As for going back to the BB Jet thing and how they did that, they used a model plane. This was the coolest thing about how they did this thing. So they had this big hangar there. They did this little model plane of the BB Jet going into the hangar and then coming out the other side. And how they did it is they made a model plane. They filmed it 50 to 60 yards from the actual hangar. So they did it as a foreground model with the hangar in the background and filmed it so it looked like it was going to go into the hangar. And then on the end, they did it for coming out as well. And then on the inside, they had the plane mounted on a pole that was on a stripped down Jag, and the Jag's driving through. And if you sort of do a frame by frame thing, you can actually see the pole and at some points the Jag, but they confuse the scene by having all these people in there moving around while this Jag is going straight through with this BB Jet on top of it on an angle to go out the door on the other side. And but when you slow it down and don't play it at normal speed, you can actually see the outline of the pole, which I thought was kind of cool how they did that, but that was all right. They had the train chase and fight. They had, and part of it, James Bond is in the car and he gets onto the tracks and drives because his tires get shredded, so he gets onto the track with the wheels. They had specially built wheels for this so he could drive along the train tracks, which was kind of cool. They were trying to this one cracked me up. It was a big faux pas that they left in. So they're doing this taxi chase. They're in India doing this taxi chase. They're getting besieged by crowds. They asked for 5,000 extras. They ended up with 10,000 extras showing up to do this big thing. And then quite by accident, so you've got the taxi, which is one of those three-wheelers with the little scooter thingy. I can't remember what they're called. Then you've got the bad guys coming up in their vehicle, and they're doing this fight scene across these two vehicles. This local person out of nowhere cycles. I mean, they're doing the sword fight going on, right? He cycles right between the taxi and the other vehicle that had the bad guys in it as they're filming this scene with the sword fights going across the two vehicles, and he just goes right through the middle of it, doesn't get injured or anything else. And they're like, and he just wasn't even fazed by the fact that these guys were having a sword fight in the middle of the street and there's all these people around. Just didn't faze him. It was like just another day of the traffic in India here. And he just cycles all the way through. And so they left it in. They just left it in there. Oh, that was brilliant. Because you kind of see the guy go through and you're like, oh, and you don't actually realize that it actually happened in real life and they left it in there. It was one of those things. The train sequence, they had Martin Grace doing the stunt work for this, and this guy, oh my gosh, what he went through. The train sequence is just, the stunt work on this train sequence is phenomenal. And then when you hear the story behind it, not only did they have the difficulty of the fact of having the concave of the curved roofs on there as well, this guy is crawling under it, over it, down the side of it, everywhere, all over this thing. And at some point, someone says, oh, maybe he should just jump that pipe. Instead of laying down on the deck, they should jump this thing. And he's having to jump from a curved roof onto a curved roof. And then he's down on the side there, and he's gripping onto the side and like pulling himself in and keeping an eye on what's coming. And they practice this over and over again on this piece of track, so they know at what point he's got to pull his body in to avoid any obstacles and all that sort of stuff. And so they're doing all this practicing and everything else. Then they spend 3 to 4 weeks of practicing. They have the helicopter for 2 days. So then they decide, okay, we've got to start shooting this thing. They end up going on an unpracticed part of the track, and Martin Grace ends up hitting this concrete structure. But they said, here is the professionalism in him. This guy, it just astounded me. It said it took away most of the flesh on his thigh. It cracked and shattered his hip and pelvis, broke a leg, broke a rib and his arm, and he still held on to the side of the train. I am like, where the hell did this guy get from? And the helicopter's filming the entire thing because they're still filming because nobody said cut. The poor guy spent 6 months in hospital. And became a very popular patient when Roger Moore popped in to say, hi, how you doing, and what's going on and all that sort of stuff. And he eventually did fully recover, so thankfully he fully recovered. And then Paul Weston, the stunt guy, was called in to take over from Martin after he'd had the accident, but everyone was sort of like, how the heck did he even stay hanging on? Everybody was just in awe of all of this. And then they had the palace they used for the floating palace belonged to this Maharana, and he had this overgrown garden that they use in the tiger chase scene, and he actually has a stuffed tiger which they put in a wheelbarrow and charged through this overgrown garden with for the scene of the tiger chase and all that sort of thing. And then they bring in the snake charm because you see them doing this charming snake charm. So they're through the guy who speaks whatever language they were speaking at the time, and from this guy, the snake charmer, one of their people happened to speak the same language, and they're going, is the snake venomous, poisonous, and all of that? And the reply sort of came back, well, yes and no. They've taken most of the venom out, but they had to leave some of it in, or it would kill the snake. And so it's sort of like, oh, okay, so now we have to be careful of the snake and make sure nobody gets bitten by the snake that they use and all this sort of thing. So, but in October, while they're filming all of this, Martin Grace comes in and visits the set, and they've got video of him coming in. He's on crutches and moving around and that sort of stuff. And so he came in to just to say hi, see how everybody was doing and all that sort of thing. They wrapped filming in January of 1983. They had a record-breaking opening in I believe it was the summer of '83. They didn't actually give us the date on that, but so they were kind of concerned about it being the 13th movie and what sort of luck would it have and all that sort of thing. So they have, one of their set designer gets hijacked. Their stunt guy ends up in this major accident. They've got this snake charmer that's got poisonous snakes, and there's just like they said, it was just like one thing on top of the other. They actually wondered if they'd actually ever get it done. So then we moved to 1985 and A View to a Kill. And Christopher Walken gets brought in here and to play Zorin. And they say that he is one of the most exciting and unexpected villains ever. And the finale involves the Golden Gate Bridge. John Glenn, Cubby Broccoli, and a few of the other hierarchy within the movie thing were out there. And the Fuji had, like the Goodyear blimp, they had the Fuji blimp. And they actually asked if it could fly near Golden Gate and all of that sort of thing. So he said you had, there was John Glenn there, Cubby Broccoli, Peter Anthony, and a couple of the other executives and all of that out there. He said, we're probably the most expensive grip team you have ever seen. And they're out there filming the Fuji blimp coming in and around the Golden Gate Bridge and everything, which they actually ended up using in the movie. And when they decided to build Zorin's blimp, they used similar colors to what Fuji had, so it made it very easy for them to be able to change the logos and stuff and keep some of the markings on from the Fuji blimp on the Zorin blimp. So I thought that was kind of cool. They started shooting A View to a Kill on the 23rd of June 1984 in Iceland on a lake. And you see that really cool iceberg / car thing and all of that sort of stuff. And James Bond's know where it is because the hatch comes up and there's a Union Jack on the inside of the hatch, and quite a very luxurious vehicle on the inside. And the poor guy in there they said was because it was all made out of metal and it had this fiberglass thing over it. And when he's actually driving around, they said he was freezing his butt off in there because there was no heat in there. It was just the engine and the metal frame and going through this lake. And yeah. While they were filming, so and then in the opening scene, they also have this chase with the ski field. So Willy Bogner was involved again. I love watching his stunts that he comes up with on skis and all of that. And they had at one point, James Bond was on a snowmobile. It ends up crashing. And they came up with the idea of using the front ski runner off the snowmobile as a snowboard for James Bond to then go down the mountain on. So I thought that was kind of cool how they did that. And so they actually used a front runner off a snowmobile as a snowboard to go down the hill. I don't even know if snowboarding was around in 1985 or not, but if it wasn't, then that probably would have been like one of the first snowboards, I guess. I don't know. The 007 stage back in England caught fire while Legend was the movie Legend was using it to do some filming in there, and they were meant to be wrapping up, and then 007 they were going to go back in there to do this. Total loss on the whole thing. And so what they ended up doing is they ended up rebuilding the studio. They said they found somebody who said it would take about a month to clear it. Once it was cleared, it would take 3 months to build it. So they started shooting as much of everything else as they could for the movie while the stage was being rebuilt. And then when the stage had finished rebuilding, they had this grand opening for it and all that, then got in there and did all the studio stuff that they needed to do, all the sets and all of that sort of thing. So they started shooting in Paris. And this one here is where they do where Grace Jones's character does this jump off the Eiffel Tower. Base jumps off the Eiffel Tower, shoot goes out there, and then she ends up landing on this riverboat on the scene. And they had BJ Worth was back, and he's been doing a lot of the amazing aerial stuff in the James Bond movies and stuff. So he was there, and there was two other guys whose names I can't remember, and I forgot to wind back the DVD to see what their names were. But they were all geared up to do this base jump off the Eiffel Tower. They had the permission to go ahead and do it. They did 23 practice jumps from a hot air balloon. They filmed every single one so they could check on the positioning of the body, the timing to get the parachute to release and all of that sort of stuff in preparation for actually jumping off the Eiffel Tower, because you couldn't really do a lot of all of that. They had to go through 32 individual organizations for permission to jump off the Eiffel Tower. Fortunately, they had a French producer working on the thing, or director, producer, director, one of those guys, working on the thing that was able to go from the French production team that was able to go in and help coordinate all of this and get everything sorted out. And then like the day before they were supposed to do the jump, this couple got up in the tower there and did an illegal jump off the tower and everything else. And so they turned around and said, nope, nobody's jumping off. Nope, it's all off. It's cancelled. We're withdrawing the permission, all of that. So their French production guy got in there and was able to convince them to allow the jump to happen. So BJ Worth actually did the jump. He actually, to start with, he did the jump from a helicopter down onto the riverboat. So you could see like Grace Jones lands on top of the riverboat and all of that. And he had to do several of those, and it was basically he was just doing the landing onto the thing. But the platform at the top, hang on, out over the ground instead of the girders. Oh, so what they, and so they did that. So they did the helicopter jumps onto the boat so it looked like she was coming down off the tower and that sort of stuff. And then when they actually did the jump from the Eiffel Tower, they actually have this platform that they put out so that because you had the girders down below with the shape of the tower of the Eiffel Tower, so they built this platform that came out, and then BJ Worth ran along the platform and then just launched himself off the platform to get as far out from the girders as possible to give him extra time in order for him to be able to pull the chute and everything else. And so they got it, and his wife and daughter were down there watching, and he landed right next to them. In one take, and the backup stuntman was not allowed to do the jump because they said, nope, we've done it, we're not doing another one. So the backup stuntman was not happy with this because it's not often you get to jump off the thing. So he calls up one of the other stuntmen and says, hey, let's go do this thing. So they get up early one morning deciding to go out and do this. And they get up to where they do the jump off the thing, not realizing that the 3/4 of the way up, the production crew were actually up there in the tower getting set up for another scene when these two stuntmen went over the edge and did this jump anyway, and BJ Worth said, I had to fire them on the spot. Done. And one of the stuntmen says, looking back, it was this really stupid thing to do, and ever since then he's had people come up to him saying, hey, thanks for doing that jump because I got the job you would have got otherwise. So they actually interviewed him, so it was kind of cool. And then Remy Julian is the stunt driver that they've used in a lot of the James Bond movies. And in this movie, he starts off in this blue car. He ends up going under this barrier. The top gets taken off. Then he ends up driving along in a convertible, and another car hits him on the back end, and he loses the back half of the car. And he's just driving around, basically the front seats and the engine. And so Remy Julian actually came up with the whole concept of doing that, driving all of that along the scene with the car breaking apart. And so they he worked out all the things and all of that sort of stuff and got it all down to perfection so they didn't have to do multiple takes and everything else. They also brought in Patrick Macnee into this thing, and if you don't know who he is, remember a little program back in the 60s called The Avengers? He was the Avenger on that one, and he was doing that at the same time that Roger Moore was playing the Saint. And so the two of them are friends from back in the Saint and Avenger days. They actually used to be on in studios next door to each other filming and all of that sort of thing. And Roger Moore was given a little leeway on this movie as far as ad-libbing goes because he took every opportunity he could to make little digs at Patrick Macnee's character. And in the movie, Patrick Macnee plays this lord who gets James Bond into Zoran's estate thing for this horse auction thing, and so Patrick Macnee's character Tibbets ends up being the driver for Roger Moore, so they've kind of flipped the roles around. And so every now and again, Roger Moore would make these little digs, these little ad-libs, little one-liners that were put in that was putting down Patrick Macnee's character and stuff. And they actually made the movie really cool and really funny on those scenes and all of that. They actually used, in the car that Patrick Macnee got to drive as the chauffeur was actually Cubby Broccoli's own Silver Cloud Rolls Royce, and it was actually used in the movie, and so that's what he got to drive. Then they actually had to kind of destroy the Rolls Royce later on, but they actually went and bought one because they didn't want to destroy Cubby Broccoli's one, which kind of a good thing. But still, they went and purchased a Rolls Royce to destroy it. I'm like, and run it into the lake. I'm like, really? Did you really have to do that to a Rolls? They're beautiful cars. Do you know how long it takes to make one of those things? The work that goes into it, and you destroyed it? They recreated the Ascot thing for the racing, or the horse racing part of it they had to do. It's really funny. One of the actress who played the German girl in that one, whose name I can't remember. There's a jacuzzi scene in there with Roger Moore and this young blonde woman. She said they were in that jacuzzi. She said they were in that jacuzzi for 8 to 9 hours filming that couple of minutes that happens in the movie. And she says, can you just imagine what our skin looked like when we came out of there? And I was sort of like, oh my gosh, I would not have been able to stand that long in the water. And when they were in San Francisco filming, Maud Adams went up there to see everybody and say hi and all of that sort of thing. And she, of course, was in Man with the Golden Gun, played Scaramanga's love interest, and then she was Octopussy in the movie Octopussy. And so she went up there, had lunch with Roger Moore and his wife and all of that, and then ended up being asked if she wanted to be an extra in the movie. She's like, sure. So she said, somewhere in one of those crowd scenes I supposedly am. If you ever find out where I am, can you let me know? Because she could never find it. That took them 3 weeks to film the fire engine chase, and the San Francisco Fire Department were they said were very helpful after the initial shock when they told them what they wanted to do with the fire engine. And they actually did this thing where a drawbridge goes up, and they take a ladder engine. So this is one that has the cab up the front, the ladder on the back with the little guy and the guy in the little cab thing at the back of the engine. So that's how long these things are, and jumped it over the thing. And they said they absolutely shattered the suspension in the fire engine. And I'm like, well, yeah. They had thousands down at Fisherman's Wharf when they were trying to film, and of course everybody's saying, oh, look, they're filming. And so there's all these crowds. They had great crowd control and all that sort of thing. They filmed a lot of the film when you see Zoran's airship up around up around the Golden Gate Bridge, and that was actually done on models back in the studios, and 4 feet off the ground type of thing. And there's when they're hanging off the side of the Golden Gate Bridge, they're like 4 feet off the ground. So they actually made models and all of that, and did that in Pinewood. And Tanya Roberts was the Bond girl in this. She played Stacey Sutton, and she actually used to be on Charlie's Angels years ago, and I actually remembered her from that. They finally got on January 7th, 1985, they had the reopening ceremony for the 007 stage, and they actually put Cubby Broccoli's name on it as a thank you to him. In mid-January, they started doing the flood mine scenes for the final were done, so that they did those in the studios and things. And this was really mean. I thought this was really mean. With Grace Jones, as she's coming through the water in the end, in the final scene where they've had the earthquake, there's water coming through all the mines and everything else, there's power lines that are down, there's zip-zapping and all that sort of thing. They didn't tell her that these lines would be arcing in the water. And so her reactions that you see in the movie are genuine. I love it when they do stuff like that to get the genuine reaction. So they didn't tell her that these power lines would be arcing in the water or putting sparks off or anything like that. So the reactions that they got from her at the time were genuine reactions, which was awesome. Roger Moore at that time decided to say goodbye to James Bond. After all, he was 58, and he didn't think it was right that the guy this old should now be going after these young women and all that sort of thing. It was one of the biggest box office hits in 1985 when it came out, and they then finished the making of it off with a recap of scenes from all the James Bond movies that Roger Moore had done so over the last 7 movies and stuff. And that was also they didn't mention this either, but it was also the last movie in which Lois Maxwell, who had played Moneypenny since Dr. No, so she had been Moneypenny for 14 movies, and it was her last movie as well. And they never announced the fact that she was leaving either. So when you come back to Living Daylights and License to Kill, there's a new Moneypenny, and then when they bring Pierce, and she's only there for the 2 movies. Then when they bring Pierce Brosnan in, there's That's when they bring in Samantha Bond, who plays Moneypenny at that point. And they did the premiere for License to Kill. A View to a Kill in San Francisco. They did it on May 24th, 1985. And B.J. Worth actually parachuted in as James Bond down into the in front of the town hall, which they set on fire during the movie, which shocked a lot of people, but it's still standing, and presented the city with a check. And I can't remember what the full amount of the check was, but the last 3 digits were 007 on the check. And he walked up and presented them with that check. And that was all part of the premiere that they did in San Francisco. So that was how they ended that movie. So yeah, Moneypenny, after 14 James Bond movies, called it quits, and they had a new person coming in for Living Daylights, which we will review tomorrow. So Living Daylights and with Timothy Dalton and License to Kill, the 2 Timothy Dalton movies we will get to talk about tomorrow. So that's it from me. You've had, let's see, Octopussy and A View to a Kill. So we're catching up. I didn't get to watch GoldenEye last night, so I'm probably going to watch it tonight. So I'm going to go watch GoldenEye now. So have a super fantastic sparkling evening, and we will catch you tomorrow, where we will talk about Living Daylights and A View and License to Kill, because they got some Timothy Dalton. Man, what he did to James Bond, whoo, it's going to be awesome. Have a super fantastic sparkling evening. Catch you guys tomorrow. Hei konera.